With Chapter 17, we will be focusing our view on the nervous system. What diseases, what infections you will clinically see in or associating with the nervous system. Keep in mind, a little review of your A&P, where when I mentioned the nervous system has been split into two categories. The central nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system. All the nerves that branch out from the spinal cord out to the rest of the body. The central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system are distinct systems. There is interplay between them, but they are not intertwined. And as we see throughout this chapter, that is an evolutionary stopgap to keep anything that may infect the peripheral nervous system to spreading to the central and thus damaging the brain. The functions of the nervous system, things such as sensory, motor, and the integrative, all take place neuron to neuron and involves pathways. Certain sets of neurons in the brain have to interplay with each other, links in a chain for you to have a thought. You hear the words I am saying, and you are able to interpret them. You are able to, in your mind, see what I am saying. You're able to, in your interpretation, determine what each of my words mean. And then you are able to relate them to ideas and thoughts that you've had previously, or ideas and thoughts you have heard from other people. As I am talking right now, your nose itches. An impulse from nerves embedded in the epidermis and dermis of your, in the dermal and subcutaneous layers of your nose, the tissues of your nose, will send a message via nerve impulse, depolarization, up the nerve, up the trigeminal nerve, into your brain. Your brain will interpret this impulses, this signal, as an itch or as pain. Your brain will then extrapolate that the response required is to scratch. Impulse will leave your brain through that one of those same neural pathways, travel down the brain stem to the spinal cord, will jump from the spinal cord, cross to the nerve ganglia, and then out to down your arm to your hand, telling your arm to bend, telling your finger to scratch your nose. There's the interplay. The neurons are specialized nerve cells within the brain and the peripheral nervous system that are going to be wrapped by special types of cells, glial cells and whatnot, the Schwann cells that wrap, protect, aid in the impulse propagation, and basically babysit, nourish Make sure the neurons get all the nourishment they need. Our our central nervous system is so important that we mammals have evolved to have multiple protective layers. We call these protective layers the meninges. The meninges, the dura mater, pia mater, the arachnoid mater, each have different compositions and each plays a slightly different role in protecting the central nervous system. The brain itself isn't just sitting there, it is floating in a pool of fluid. The cerebral spinal fluid, flows, as it shows in the figure at the bottom left there. You'll see it flows out from the base, flows out and around and then down the spinal column. This flow ensures that the brain is constantly bathed in fresh spinal fluid. The spinal fluid acts as a shock absorber as you throughout your day, whip your head around or you hit your head on things. I've already talked about this slide, so I'm not going to worry so much about it. Defenses of the nervous system. When it comes right down to it, really not much in the way of defenses. You really do not want to have your immune system reacting in the central nervous system. Remember, one of the, as I've mentioned in previous lectures, part of the immune response is inflammation. Fluid flowing into the area of an injury or of an infection. Fluid flows in so that it can be drained out into the lymphatics. Well, you do not want extra fluid flowing in to the central nervous system, because remember, the central nervous system is encased not only in bone, your skull, or the vertebrae, if you're talking the spinal column, spinal cord, but it's also wrapped in those protective layers we just talked about, the meninges. As we're going to see in this chapter, inflammation of the brain will lead to brain damage because as fluid goes in, something has to give extra space because it's a set volume. The skull is not going to swell and increase in size, so it's going to be your brain that's going to get pushed down, going to get squeezed due to the increased fluid pressure. Best defense the central nervous system has is what is referred to as the blood-brain barrier. While the capillary beds, all the blood vessels throughout your body are leaky, turns out the vascular interface in the brain and the spinal cord, not so much. Special blood vessels there allow for minimal fluid exchange, maximal gas and nutrient exchange. Because of this, it's hard to get certain antibiotics into the brain. It's hard to get certain drugs across that blood-brain barrier. So some antibiotics that would work great if you had an infection in your hand are not going to be so useful when it comes to bacterial infections in the brain. So this immunological privilege, as I said, is a protection mechanism. We saw this immunological privilege in the last chapter when we were discussing the eye. Since the immune response can be a little heavy-handed at the site of an infection, at the site of an injury, you know, not only would the infected cells and damaged cells be killed and destroyed, but neighboring cells that were still healthy could also be destroyed. In the brain, you can only lose so many brain cells before you start risking certain neural pathways. Once a neural pathway is lost, well, reestablishing that pathway is near impossible.